the Nightly Business Report.
Good evening. Tonight, the Finance Ministry releases new information on funds lost through car import taxes. Sri Lanka's central bank promotes Assistant Governors AAM Thasim and JPR Karunaratne to the post of Deputy Governor. The beginning of the financial week sees a hopeful start as the ASBI and the CBSL 20 closes in the green. And the Colombo Stock Exchange announces changes in S&P Sri Lanka 20 index constituents.
From Studio 24, here's Sina Mayadune.
Good evening and thank you for joining us on the Nightly Business Report. Sathasivam Viyalendiran has been appointed as Sri Lanka's new State Minister of Trade and Environment before President Ranil Wickremesinghe at the Presidential Secretariat. Viyalendiran was elected to Parliament through the Sri Lanka Podujana Perumana party from Batticaloa district.
He previously held the posts of Media State Minister and State Minister of Backward Rural Areas Development and Promotion of Domestic Animal Husbandry and Minor Economic Crop Cultivation under President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Despite new reigns, there is little expectation of changes to be made to current trade policies.
Sri Lanka's central bank has repaid $225 million to the Reserve Bank of India in the first quarter of 2024, on top of earlier repayments in October 2023. Sri Lanka gave a treasury guarantee to cover a $2.6 billion credit from RBI to Sri Lanka's central bank.
Sri Lanka's got deferred payments due to India via the Asia Clearing Union during the worst currency crisis triggered by rate cuts since the creation of the central bank. According to the official data, the outstanding debt due to the Reserve Bank of India fell to $2,226.43 million by end of March 2024 from $2,451.43 million in December. From October, the central bank had repaid $375 million to India. Sri Lanka has repaid debt and also collected reserves by avoiding precipitate rate cuts. Repaying foreign debt or collecting foreign reserves requires interest rates to be kept a little higher to crowd out domestic credit and investments. However, if rates are cut, claiming historical inflation was low and the below market rates are enforced with open market operations, forex shortages will develop and reserves will be run down. Analysts have said that RBI loans and swaps, which were used to intervene in forex markets, also led to their sterilization, with new money effectively refinancing private sector credit and delaying a correction of the balance of payments.
Information disclosed by the Finance Ministry shows Sri Lanka has lost 14.3 billion rupees in taxes from car permits given to the public servants, including doctors, military officers, central bankers, Finance Ministry and tax officials in 2019 and 2020, inclusive of some 2021 tax losses when imports were banned for the rest of the year. 14.4 billion rupees of foregone revenue from a waived luxury tax is shown.
The list only shows waivers of a so-called luxury tax imposed on larger vehicles above a certain value and size. The list does not show other vehicles imported under car permits, such as double cabs or cars below a certain size. The list also does not seem to include tax-free cars imported by politicians. In 2019, Sri Lanka has lost 8.3 billion rupees from the luxury tax on car permits, and in 2019 the loss is 5.92 billion rupees. In 2021, when car imports were stopped as the central bank started printing money to cut rates and target potential output, only 85.6 million rupees were lost. Among the biggest tax waivers of over 10 million rupees went to some doctors and military officers. Doctors were among the biggest users of tax/car permits in the list. Sri Lanka at one time did not allow cars imported by state workers to be transferred for many years. But reportedly, after customs raided a finance company involving a fleet of vehicles, the rule was relaxed by the then president.
Sri Lanka's central bank said Assistant Governors AAM Thasim and JPR Karunaratne were promoted to the post of Deputy Governor. Mr. Thasim has over 31 years of service at Central Bank of Sri Lanka in different capacities in the areas of supervision and regulation of banking institutions, international operations, communication, payments and settlements, employees' provident fund, finance risk management, deposit insurance, security services and information technology. Mr. Karunaratne has over 33 years of service at the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in different capacities in the areas of supervision and regulation of banks and non-bank financial institutions, currency management, public debt, secretariat, finance, policy review and monitoring. He has served as the Director of Supervision of Non-Bank Financial Institutions and the Superintendent of Currency and has contributed towards strengthening the legal and regulatory framework in the non-bank financial institutions sector and has played a prominent role in the consolidation of the non-bank financial institutions sector. State Minister of Finance Jahan Singha called on the opposition to abandon impractical election promises, asserting the need for responsible discourse focused on the country's future rather than personal political gains. Speaking yesterday, he highlighted the potential risks of reversing crucial economic reforms at a time when Sri Lanka is recovering through challenging yet necessary measures.
He warned that we are now on the right track, implementing very difficult economic reforms, and this is a time to think about the future of the country rather than personal political goals. The reversal of these reforms could lead to a significant uncertainty about the country's future. Singha asserted that Sri Lanka is progressing through globally recognized methods, adhering to positive and realistic economic policies. He urged all political actors to prioritize the country's long-term stability and prosperity over short-term political ambitions. The State Minister noted that the government, under the leadership of President Ranil Wickremesinghe, is committed to transparency and responsibility in its governance.
Sri Lanka CERT urges the public to be cautious of fake messages purportedly sent by various banks, commercial institutions and international organizations. These scams promise donations, cash gifts, lucky draws and job insurance using the names of legitimate entities.
Cyber criminals attempt to contact individuals through fake websites, social media platforms, SMS and WhatsApp. By accessing the links provided in these messages, they can steal data from computers and mobile phones, leading to various forms of abuse and financial fraud. The Sri Lanka CERT reports that these types of crimes have been increasing recently. With a growing number of victims, fraudsters often operate around national and religious festivals, exploiting the public's trust during these times. In response, Sri Lanka CERT and other organizations have launched extensive awareness campaigns. Despite these efforts, the number of complaints from victims continue to rise due to ignorance and neglect. Sri Lanka CERT advises the public to verify any suspicious messages by visiting the official websites of the respective institutions, contacting them through official phone numbers, or making inquiries before responding to such messages on the internet and social media.
Let's take a short commercial break. This is the Nightly Business Report. Welcome back to the Nightly Business Report. The start of the financial week saw hopeful numbers over at the Colombo Stock Exchange as the ASPI and S&P SL20 closed in the green. For an update, let's connect with Minal Wickremesinghe from Capital Alliance.
Today, the Colombo Stock Exchange concluded on a positive note compared to the previous trading session, brought on by strengthened sentiment among market participants. The market ended at 12,271 points, marking a 22.49 point increase from the previous trading session, with a turnover of 1.36 billion rupees. The S&P SL20 index also experienced an upward movement of 22.17 points to end the day at 3,632 points. Notable institutional engagement was observed across various sectors, with significant turnover in John Kills Holdings PLC and Haley's PLC, and crossings recorded on the board on People's Leasing and Finance PLC and Melser Corp PLC. The top 5 gainers for the day were SMB Leasing, Industrial Asphalts, Royal Palms Beach Hotel, Carson's Cumberbatch PLC and Hapukas Den Plantations. The top 5 losers for the day were Blue Diamonds both voting and non-voting, Tess Agro voting and non-voting, and Asia Capital PLC.
Well, with the week set to see some turbulence following the previous slow financial run, let's get an update on the forecast of the markets for the coming days. Here's Ranjan Ranatunga from First Capital Holdings.
Looking at the outlook for stock market this week, we expect a slight pickup in activity for this week, mainly due to the improved confidence as the clarity regarding debt restructuring surfaces after the speech from President Ranil Wickremesinghe, which is expected to be scheduled for 26th of this month. Moreover, we have also seen a steady improvement in overall macro indicators, with inflation steadily remaining below the 5% mark, which is directed by the central bank. Also, we have seen a steady decline in interest rate as AWPRL has fallen to 9.09%, a drop of 6 basis points compared to last week. Furthermore, looking at the other alternative investments that are in the market, the government security yields has also fallen steadily and is at around 9.6% for the 1-year bill for the last week. While we believe that there's no other alternative investments in the market as well, which makes stock market one of the main investment point for the investor. With that, we expect a slight improvement in activity in the coming weeks, while the clarity on the debt restructuring is also expected to give a further confidence booster to the investors, which will further improve the activity in the stock market in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Gold prices edged up today as U.S. Treasury yields eased, while investors awaited inflation reading due later this week that could influence the Federal Reserve's interest rate trajectory. Spot gold was up 0.4% at $2,330.56 per ounce after dropping 1% on Friday due to a stronger dollar. U.S. gold futures GCCV1 rose 0.5% to $2,343.30. Oil prices fell in Asian trade today, remaining under pressure from a stronger dollar as traders awaited more cues on U.S. inflation and interest rates this week. Brent oil futures expiring in August fell 0.4% to $84.88 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell 0.4% to $80.41. Crude markets were also subject to some profit-taking after a strong run over the past 2 weeks. They had added 3% in the prior week. The Sri Lankan rupee has appreciated against the US dollar at commercial banks in Sri Lanka today compared to last week. According to People's Bank, the buying and selling rates of the US dollar have dropped from 300 rupees and 3 cents to 299 rupees and 64 cents, and from 310 rupees and 19 cents to 309 rupees and 79 cents respectively. At Commercial Bank, the buying rate of the US dollar has dropped from 299 rupees and 31 cents to 298 rupees and 82 cents, while the selling rate has dropped from 309 rupees and 50 cents to 309 rupees. Now let's observe how the rupee behaved against the other global currencies. Let's take a short commercial break. This is the Nile Business Report. Welcome back to the Nile Business Report. The Colombo Stock Exchange announced changes in S&P Sri Lanka 20 index constituents made by S&P Dow Jones indices at the 2024 mid-year rebalance. Effective from 24th of June 2024, the exclusions list SoftLogic Life Insurance plc and new inclusions list LB Finance plc as announced by S&P Dow Jones indices.
The S&P SL20 index includes the 20 largest companies by total market capitalization listed on the CSE that meet minimum size, liquidity and financial viability thresholds. The constituents are weighed by float-adjusted market capitalization subject to a single stock cap of 15%, which is employed to reduce single stock concentration. The S&P SL20 index has been designed in accordance with international practices and standards. All stocks are classified according to the Global Industry Classification Standard, which is co-developed by the S&P Dow Jones Indices, and MCSI is widely used by market participants throughout the world. To be eligible for inclusion, a stock must have a minimum float-adjusted market capital of 500 million Sri Lankan rupees, a 6-month medium daily value traded of 0.25 million rupees, and have positive net income over the 12 months prior to the rebalancing reference date.
Fitch Ratings says its Global Sovereign's Mid-Year Outlook 2024 that global sovereign credit conditions are broadly neutral for 2024 as moderately weaker global economic growth and persistent strains on public finances are balanced by lower inflation and some easing in financial conditions.
Further setbacks to the disinflation path in the US could constrain the Federal Reserve from cutting rates, with adverse complications for global bond yields and increase upward pressure on the US dollar. Such a combination could weigh on this year's improvement in emerging market financing conditions, evident in narrowing in bond spreads and re-access of international bond markets by some low-rated sovereigns. Continued access to IMF funding will be important for distressed frontier markets. Sovereign interest costs are continuing to rise, particularly for developed markets, as debt stocks amortize and are refinanced at current bond market yields. These and broader expenditure pressures mean there is a forecast of a stalling in post-pandemic improvements in medium budget deficits and government debt this year. Geopolitical risks, including war in Ukraine and the Middle East, US-China rivalries, and more protectionist trade and industrial policies are likely to persist.
The Colombo Stock Exchange has approved in principle the listings of Commercial Bank of Ceylon PLC's repeat 10 billion debenture issue opening on Tuesday, the 2nd of July 2024.
The bank has announced an initial issue of 100 million Base 3 compliant Tier 2 listed rated unsecured subordinated redeemable debentures with a non-buyability conversion feature at the par value of 100 rupees each, to raise the sum of 10 billion rupees with an option to issue up to a further 50 million debentures. At the discretion of the bank in the event of an oversubscription of the initial issue and with a further option to issue up to a further 50 million debentures, at the discretion of the bank in the event of an oversubscription of the initial issue and the second tranche. The bank said the issue will further strengthen its Tier 2 capital base, raise funds for the expansion of its lending portfolio, and bridge maturity mismatches in the assets and liabilities portfolio of the bank. Limited to qualified investors, the debentures will be offered in 6 types with 3 tenures: types A and B with a 5-year tenor, type C and D with a 7-year tenor, and types E and F with a 10-year tenor.
Let's take a short commercial break. This is an Nightly Business Report. Welcome back to the Nightly Business Report. Most Asian stocks fell today, with Chinese markets leading losses on the prospect of a trade war with the European Union, while anticipation of key US inflation data also kept sentiment on edge. China's Shanghai Shenzhen CSI 300 and Shanghai Composite indices fell 0.4% and 0.8% respectively, while losses in mainland stocks dragged Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index down 1%. Australia's ASX 200 fell 0.6%, while South Korea's Kospi shed 0.9%. Japanese stocks were mild outliners today, with the Nikkei 225 and Topix indices rising 0.3% each. NVIDIA has signed a deal to deploy its artificial intelligence technology at data centers owned by Qatari telecoms group Ooredoo in 5 Middle Eastern countries.
NVIDIA has signed a deal to deploy its artificial intelligence technology at data centers owned by Qatari telecoms group Ooredoo in 5 Middle Eastern countries. That's according to Ooredoo's CEO Aziz Aluthman Fakhru. The agreement marks NVIDIA's first large-scale launch in a region to which Washington has curbed the export of sophisticated U.S. chips to stop Chinese firms from using Middle Eastern countries as a backdoor to access the newest AI technology. Ooredoo says the move will make it the first company in the region able to give clients of its data centers in Qatar, Algeria, Tunisia, Oman, Kuwait, and the Maldives direct access to NVIDIA's AI and graphics processing technology. Washington allows the export of some NVIDIA technology to the Middle East, but curbs exports of the company's most sophisticated chips. NVIDIA and Ooredoo did not disclose the value of the deal, which was signed on the sidelines of the TM Forum in Copenhagen on June 19th. Ooredoo also would not disclose exactly what type of NVIDIA technology it will be installing.
China and the EU agreed to start talks on the planned imposition of tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles being imported into Europe.
China and the European Union have agreed to start talks on the planned tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles being imported into the European market, senior officials on both sides said on Saturday. The news comes as Germany's economy minister Robert Habeck visited Beijing and Shanghai. The first trip by a senior European official to China since Brussels proposed hefty duties on EV imports to combat what the EU considers excessive subsidies. Habeck said he had been informed by EU Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis that there would be concrete negotiations. The confirmation came after the head of China's Commerce Ministry and Dombrovskis had agreed to start consultations over the EU's anti-subsidy investigation into Chinese EVs. Habeck called it a first step and said many more would be necessary. Zhang Xiaozi, the chairman of China's National Development and Reform Commission, denied accusations of unfair subsidies, saying the development of the country's new energy industry was the result of fierce competition. He told Habeck that he hoped Germany would demonstrate leadership within the EU and that proposed EU duties on Chinese-made EVs would hurt both sides. The EU's provisional duties of up to 38.1% on imported Chinese EVs are set to apply by July 4th, with the investigation set to continue until November 2nd, when definitive duties, typically for 5 years, could be imposed.
Well, that concludes today's Nightly Business Report. We'll see you again tomorrow with the latest happenings around the business globe. Until then, I'm Sina Mayadune. Have a good night.